ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. I'm your host, Rob Schilling, and I wanted to start off today's program by talking about what happens when the police department in your community gets corrupted. And it's a very difficult thing to talk about. I have a lot of friends in the police department, some that I've never even met, but you know that I support you, and I try to do what I can to support the department. It's becoming so difficult. I take a press release that came out today, a joint statement from the Charlottesville City Council, City Manager, and Chief of Police, and I think the headline says a lot. The problem is that the police department has become a tool of politics in Charlottesville. The City Council politics, the City Manager politics, they're no longer able to operate autonomously to do the job of policing. And this press release is just one in a long line of indications that we have real problems. You know, the time goes back when the police department became corrupted to the leadership of Gary O'Connell. And back in around 2002, 2003, when I was serving on the Charlottesville City Council, the former city manager, Gary O'Connell, came to the city council and said, "I'd like to become the director of public safety." And I kind of scratched my head because I'd never even heard the term before. And he said, "Well, it's just a little technicality for my retirement. But if you guys, the city council, will make me the director of public safety, we'll just change a little paperwork and that'll be it. And it won't really have an effect." It's the one vote that I regret greatly when I was on Charlottesville City Council because I really didn't understand what I was being asked to do. And I trusted the man. Almost immediately after taking this vote in closed session to name the city manager as, quote, the director of public safety in Charlottesville, I was contacted by members of the police department at the time who were very disappointed. And I explained to them that, if I'd done something wrong, I was very sorry, but the way it was presented to me was nothing nefarious, just paperwork. But what it turned out to do was to take the Charlottesville Police Department out of the control of the police chief and put it under the purview of the city manager, at that time Gary O'Connell, but anybody who came along, which was leading us to a place of what I would call danger. And the danger manifested itself in August of 2017 when we had city councilors, a city manager, and others trying to control the police department when they needed to be able to be autonomous and to coordinate with the state police, as we had huge problems in the city of Charlottesville during those days. So we get a joint statement from the City Council, the Charlottesville City Manager, and the Charlottesville Police Department. What are they talking about? Well, they start out by describing a June 13th, 2020 demonstration called Defund the Police Block Party. I noticed they didn't quite name the full event because it was also something about making noise, which they did in great numbers and in great decibels. And they talk about it starting over at John Paul Jones Arena, which they say located in Albemarle County. Technically, that's true. The block party then marched into the city of Charlottesville, where attendees exercised their First Amendment rights. Let me stop right there. They did exercise First Amendment rights, the right to free speech and the right to assembly. But is there a First Amendment right to block traffic, to impede the ingress and egress of people in this community who may need urgent care at the hospital? A note where they were was blocking access to a large part of the community to UVA Hospital, but just to go about their daily business. Is that a constitutional right? Is that a First Amendment right? You see the capitulation and the pandering that's going on in this press release from what I call the Department of Disinformation. Of course, the police chief is right on board here because she is a political tool of the Charlottesville City Council, unfortunately. They go on to talk about the projected number of attendees, and then that they had a policy group there from UVA, the city, and Albemarle County, and that they had a unified command agreement. Since the organizers advertised this event would commence at the John Paul Jones Arena, you see they're covering ground here. They're covering their butts. The University of Virginia, under the direction of Associate Vice President of Safety and Security and the Chief of Police, Tim Longo, whom I think extraordinarily high of. However, he is derided by current city councilors. But I think very highly of Tim. I worked with him during my time on Charlottesville City Council. He's a personal friend, and I think Tim Longo is the right man for the job at the right time at UVA. So they go on to tell us that he took the lead in planning the effort and invited the Virginia State Police to be here in case an emergency occurred. Bravo, Tim Longo. That's what we need to do. We need to be over-prepared, not under-prepared. And yet this whole movement, this whole issue of the gathering that took place over the weekend was to abolish the police department and make noise. Have we seen these things spin out of control in other places? Did it actually spin out of control here in Charlottesville? I don't think it spun out of control in a physical way. We didn't have violence, but I do believe that the protesters were testing the limits of the police and taking over an intersection. And I have people who were listening in on the police scanner at the time who heard the Charlottesville Police Department give stand-down orders. Do not interfere. If you're approached, back off. So they basically ceded this territory to violent Marxists involved in this. Not everybody was, but we know this is a violent Marxist movement. And so in spite of the fact that Tim Longo was in charge, the Charlottesville Police Department was being told to stand down. Now, all of this has come about because the police chief, Dr. Rachel Brackney, was asked at a recent city council meeting whether or not the Charlottesville Police Department was coordinating with the state because somebody had evidence in pictures of state police officers in Charlottesville Police Department, Charlottesville city vehicles. Oh, the humanity. As if there was something inherently wrong with that, which there isn't. But she was put on the spot. And she claimed that never happened. We had no coordination with the Virginia State Police. And then, the pictures came out and there was a lot of egg on the chief's face, and hence this press release came out. Let me continue with what they had to say because there's a lot more information in here that is very, very important. So they say, given the mobile nature of recent local and national demonstrations, and of course they're referring to August of 2017, but other things that have gone on, it was clear this event could spill into nearby public streets and block public intersections. Well, yeah, it was clear that it could, and it actually did. It's kind of odd that they say that it could, and then they don't really acknowledge that it did. The release from the Charlottesville Department of Disinformation continues. Additionally, those who would want to silence or challenge our community's calls for reform are ever present and becoming more visible in Charlottesville. Now, what are they talking about, and who are they talking about there? Our community's calls for reform. Do you believe that that assembled mob speaks for the entirety of Charlottesville? If you do, and that's exactly the implication that's being made here, that this mob speaks for, this is our community's calls for reform, that it speaks for every single person in Charlottesville, that's a total lie. And then they go on to impugn people in this community who would oppose them. They say the people in our community who want to silence or challenge our community's calls for reform are ever present, meaning they're in our community and becoming more visible in Charlottesville. Who are they talking about? I don't see anybody visible in Charlottesville who wants to stand up to this mob. They're scared for their physical safety. They're scared for their employment. They're scared to say a word. No one's challenging them. How ridiculous, and what a total lie from the Charlottesville Department of Disinformation. And this is the sort of political pandering that takes place when you get a press release like this coming out of a joint group, the city manager, the city council, and the police department. It's an insult to people who would oppose violent Marxism and calls to abolish the police, including probably a good number of the people who work for the Charlottesville Police Department, both civilian and sworn officers, who thought that this was a pretty despicable event. That paragraph continues, we are committed to ensuring that we do everything in our power to prevent a tragedy similar to the one that occurred in August of 2017. So what they're doing here, again, is a CYA move, a cover-your-ass move, wherein they're claiming that their presence there, they're trying to apologize to the violent Marxists who assembled And they're trying to say, we're so sorry we were there. We were just there to protect you, to let you do what you were going to do, because some bad people from Charlottesville who are becoming increasingly visible would want to attack you. So that's why we were there. The press release continues. Chief Rachel Brackney represented the city as a liaison officer, and Captain Joseph Hatter served as the city's incident commander. Based on the nature of the unified command structure, we were aware that the Virginia State Police would be present. However, we did not initiate this particular request, and we were not fully aware of the number of officers who would be present. Okay, so what? You knew they were going to be there. You didn't know how many were coming. That's probably not your business anyway. I don't know what you do with that information or why you would ask, but you now admit that you were aware the Virginia State Police would be there. They go on here to mention that a few of the city vehicles were made available for shared use by participating agencies, i.e. the Virginia State Police. They go on to name something here that sounds rather innocuous. For example, they say some facilities' maintenance vehicles were given temporary Charlottesville police markings and driven by Virginia State police officers. That's the issue that came up at the city council meeting. That's what people were upset about. Again, I have no problem with that at all. But you see what happens when you practice to deceive. The Virginia State Police received permission to drive the vehicles from a Charlottesville Police Department officer responsible for transportation and logistics. So the Charlottesville Police Department knew, but the chief didn't know? Well, that's what they go on to say. Neither Chief Brackney nor Dr. Richardson, the city manager, was aware of the specifics for this operational decision. Again, very interesting wording. Not aware of the specifics. Does that mean aware of the generalities of this operational decision? When she was asked to comment at Monday's city council meeting. CYA, I don't think this is working so well. As a city, we recognize the importance of sharing accurate information about public safety matters. No, you don't. That's a total lie. I exposed not long ago that you were paying the former police chief, Al Thomas, when you tried to tell people, that would be Brian Wheeler in the City Department of Disinformation, when you tried to tell people that he had retired and left of his own volition. No one mentioned that Al Thomas was getting paid until we broke the story wide open. So, no, you don't. Total lie. He concludes, we understand in order for our citizens to trust us, it's essential for us to have answers to the very basic questions. Well, I think the citizens aren't going to trust you, and rightfully so, because you've now become an arm of politics instead of a law enforcement agency. And again, not to impugn the fine officers that are there, but this is bad and getting worse. We understand there's a tremendous amount of work for us to do. They're groveling now in order for us to earn your trust. We also understand that inaccurate or incomplete information will only prevent the relationships we wish to build from ever coming to fruition. So are you saying that since Chief Brackney gave out inaccurate and incomplete information that you will never be able to build these relationships in the city? Then why are you even trying? What a stupid statement. What groveling, what bootlicking. We regret that a more detailed explanation of the city's response was not available at the city council meeting on Monday. Did you not think Brian Wheeler, director of the Department of Disinformation, Chief Brackney, Dr. Richardson, city councilors et al., did you not think that at that meeting on Monday that there would not be people asking a lot of questions about what took place over the weekend? The fact that they were placated and mollified by being allowed to take over an intersection and block countless numbers of citizens of this community from going about their daily business is one thing. But did you not think that there would be people there complaining even about the police presence? The whole thing was about defunding the police. So if you were unprepared, it says you're all incompetent, and maybe you all ought to resign. But this groveling is just preposterous, and it's really insulting to anybody with a brain. As for the members of the Charlottesville Police Department, I stand with you. I'm very sorry that you have to go through this. I even have a lot of sympathy for the chief. And I have sympathy for the chief just because I think she could do a better job if she was not burdened with all of this political baggage. However, she did step into it of her own free will. She knew what was going on here. She knew, at least to some extent, what she was getting into. And so, in some ways, she made her bed and now has to lay in it. But for the officers, I don't know why you haven't left already. I don't understand. and I have a couple people that I know pretty well that are on the department. But I can't understand why you stay here. I thank you for doing so. I think it's atrocious what's being done to you, and I understand why so many people have left, why there's been a mass exodus from the Charlottesville Police Department over the past many months and even the last few years. The city department, for all of their claims of transparency, the director of disinformation, Brian Wheeler, and his counterpart at the police department, Tyler Hahn, when I ask them questions, specific questions about how many people have left and under what circumstances, I generally get crickets, or it takes them weeks and weeks to provide an answer to information that should be available at your fingertips. So when you tell the community that you want to provide them information in order to build trust, you're failing. You're falling flat on your face. And I think for a long, long, long time in Charlottesville, the people who've been in charge of dispensing the information are nothing but a protectionist racket to keep the politicians protected and to keep the Charlottesville Police Department debilitated. The Schilling Show Unleashed will continue in just a moment.
Join the revolution. Online at schillingshow.com.
BorderHawk.news is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.news highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. BorderHawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border, as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Schilling Show Unleashed.
All right, the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues, and I'm very pleased to welcome back to this program. He was a guest with me on the air and now today on the podcast, Dave Wannenburgh, and he has a very interesting personal history, and he's going to share it with us today, particularly in light of what we're seeing, the demise of the police and lessons from South Africa. Dave, welcome to the Schilling Show podcast Unleashed.
Hi, good day. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
All right. For people who didn't hear you last time when you were on with me, I think it's very important to talk just a little bit about where you're from and why you're no longer there.
I'm from South Africa. I came here 8 years ago. We were given the opportunity in 2008 to come here. We made a decision back then to look at options to come to America, in that we loved our country, South Africa, but we saw with the rising crime and the political situation and everything we see happening now in America, unfortunately, and the demise of a fantastic country, for safety for my children and my family.
You know, many Americans, probably most Americans, are only vaguely familiar with South Africa. We know some of the political things that took place and the changes in that country because of the national news over the years. But what was the rule of law like when you were growing up there? In other words, was there a reverence and respect for what we call the rule of law?
Oh, definitely. You know, I grew up in a country where crime was minimal. We had safety. We never worried. We could run free in the streets. We didn't have fences around our houses. We didn't know what alarms were, private security. We had a police force we respected, a well-trained police force. We were raised to respect the police, to be thankful for the job they do. They get up every day to protect our lives, to keep us safe. And it was a wonderful, wonderful place and a safe country, a law-abiding country, a godly country at the end of the day, you know, to grow up in.
You know, I think South Africa, as we look at it, is a very large place, and I don't want anybody to get the impression that this was just some little enclave you were in. So the description that you've given us, I mean, I'm sure it doesn't apply to every single square mile, but I mean, is that by and large how the country was?
Most of the country, I would say. Yeah, you know, there were pockets. Obviously, you always find pockets, and you know, in those days, I think it was about 25 million people in the country. You know, we've opened our borders now, and there's like 60 million. um, which causes us problems that Americans don't always see. But by and large, most of the country was. It had its problems. Every society does,
Sure.
and every country does, and you address those problems, and you try and heal problems where you've had between peoples. But by and large, the country was a good, safe country.
We're talking with Dave Wannenburgh, and we're talking about his experience in South Africa and the things that are going on today in America, particularly the demise of the police and this attack on law enforcement. So I think it's always instructive, Dave, to look at how and when things begin to change. So what was the push? What caused this beginning of the earthquake in law enforcement respect or lack thereof?
Well, it was the rise in criminal element.
Mm-hmm.
Criminals don't like police. Criminals cry foul when the police arrest them. Every criminal is innocent, And we saw that the rise in change in government, change in policies, change in the attack on the police. Exactly what we're seeing here. I always say we started criminalizing the policeman. Our policeman, when last did you stop in the street and thank a policeman for what he does? He gets up in the morning, he puts on his uniform and he goes out to protect us. He puts his life on the line for us. And look at what these youngsters and these people today are doing. They're not thankful. The police are the first one they want to call when something goes wrong. But we saw that agenda coming into South Africa, that no matter what the policeman does, it's going to be wrong. He's immediately, if something goes wrong, he's immediately a murderer. And a hardened criminal is this hero. And that's what started happening. The agenda was that. So what happens is it takes the policeman, and I'm not saying there aren't bad policemen. I'm an accountant. Believe me, percentage-wise, there's far more bad accountants than there are percentage-wise bad policemen. And it's easy to sit on a couch and watch a TV and evaluate a policeman's job. But when that policeman is walking up to your car, he doesn't know. He doesn't look at me. He doesn't know whether I'm high on drugs or drunk or got a firearm. He's in high alert. And I've got to respect that. I was taught, I was watching something, a sort of message from something, one of my friends was actually speaking. I went to see what he said, and he's an African American, and he was saying, as when he grew up, his father had to teach him that when a police officer stops him, he must put his hands on the dashboard and hold this and be polite and open all the windows. And he was saying that as if he only had to do that because he was black. Mm-hmm. My father raised me that too, to respect police. I raised my son. I've raised him to respect that police officer. That police officer pulling him over, he might be just doing a routine check. When I was young, I got pulled over. I'm coming home at 2:00 in the morning. I get pulled over by a police officer. I'm respectful. I'm thankful he's pulling me over, because the next driver that he pulls over could be someone who's drunk and kills a whole family because they're drunk. So I'm respecting that and respecting the dangerous situation he's putting himself in. But when we start criticizing from the couch everything the police officer does, and we make out the criminal, whether it's a drunk driver or someone getting arrested for whatever reason, when we start glorifying that and criminalize the police stop doing their job. Can you blame them? Am I going to do my job if I'm going to go to jail because I did my job? We should be thanking the police. And if there are problems, solve those problems.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. One of the things I did when I ran for elected office many years ago was go on some police ride-alongs, and I went out on the dangerous shift, the overnight shift and into the middle of the morning. And it was really eye-opening. I mean, I had an idea that they were dealing with issues. I like the television show Cops. I've been watching that for a long, long time, recently canceled as a result of all this ridiculousness that's going on right now. But being out in Charlottesville with these guys one-on-one in the cars and on foot and in the midst of fracases and all manner of trouble, I had a newfound respect for what they have to go through. And what I witnessed was, at every high tension scene when there was more than a few people gathered, the attacks happened immediately. And we're going back now, not 20 years, but almost 20 years. You get out of the car and all of a sudden you got people yelling and jeering at you. And I see these guys having to put on a face. They just have to put on the stone face and try to deal with things professionally. I think most of the population, when put into a stressful situation like that, time after time after time, would just crack and fall apart.
100%.
It's amazing to me that they're able to keep it together. So I want to put a big exclamation point on saying thank you when you see somebody out and about in a uniform, or just give them a thumbs up when you see them in the car, because my goodness, these days they're probably expecting that they're going to get a middle finger.
100%.
Yeah. We're talking with Dave Wannenburgh, and we're talking about the demise of the police, lessons from South Africa. So let's talk about the push and how it manifested itself. In other words, you mentioned why this started happening and that people started looking at the police, and there was certainly an agenda there. But what did it look like? Was this the media? Were this personalities getting up and speaking out? What were the things that happened?
Well, times were different. Today we've got Facebook. We've got a different kind of media that was pushed out. In those days we didn't have all of that. So it was TV. It was a lot of negativity against the police, and again the police being charged for anything they did. Whatever they did, they are guilty for arresting a criminal.
Was this coming from the court system, from the prosecutors?
It was coming from the government.
From the government.
It was coming from the people. Generally, the criminals. Innocent, law-abiding people. We want the police.
Of course we do.
No matter who we are, we want law and order. We understand it, but the criminal element moves in. And so it was agendas that were being played to do away with the police. It also, powers that be, political. Sometimes having lawlessness keeps them in power. Because who do you think you're going to vote for you? The criminal is going to vote for you because you're going to say, we're going to do away with the police. The police prevent you from doing your criminal activities.
Yes,
and
indeed.
your friends that might be in jail, who's going to release them? It becomes political, and certainly there it became a political game. They don't care for the man in the street. If they cared for the man in the street, they would buff up the police. When I came to America, one of the things we loved, having seen the demise of the police, was the respect that Americans had for their armed forces and for their policemen. People that are going out there and fighting every day to put their lives on the line for us so that we can live safely. The policeman that put in his life, if there was a policeman in an audience, they would be asked to stand how many times and they would be applauded. What's happening to society now that those people that are out there for us and they're being attacked like this? And what about us that do respect that? That's why, as I say, thank your policemen when you see them. Let's get back to what America's about. Applauding and being grateful to those men that are doing the job that we don't have to do. Go and riot. If you're against the police, go and riot like you did with a midnight shift and see what reality is like.
Yeah, you put yourself in that position, and I wish any of these people that are going around screaming and having all of the riots and the gatherings and the disruptions would take maybe just a week and go out 2 or 3 hours a night with an open mind, just sitting in that seat and seeing what it looks like from the other side. It would be fascinating. Dave Wannenburgh, I wanted to ask you, because you referenced agendas, and I know there's agendas at play here in America right now. What was the agenda, or what were the agendas in South Africa that became evident to you watching this attempted dismantling of law and order?
The agendas there was power, obviously, and taking out the law and order that kept, a lot of it was, if we look at farmers, let's say in South Africa, there's a huge agenda there in taking out, the farmers used to have their own commandos, which took care of the farm because you were widespread. The government came in and disallowed that, disbanded that, and took gun ownership away so you couldn't defend yourself, which means the criminal elements now move in and can murder. Nobody's worried, here in America. And one death is too many. Don't get me wrong. Somebody dies by mistake or dies underhand, or if it is wrong, abuse or something, it's wrong.
Yeah.
But thousands of South African farmers are being brutally slaughtered every year, and nobody does anything. The South African farmer is the most dangerous occupation in the world. 200 per 100,000 are slaughtered, murdered every year. It's not just, and not for any reason, just because of hatred that is drummed up. And we've seen that hatred being drummed up here. The narrative is one of hating each other instead of unity. There's, the policeman doesn't hate you. He loves you because he actually wants to try and stop the criminal element and keep us safe. But the government narrative is trying to get through to them to hate the policeman. The policeman's against you. I was stopped here a while ago for speeding. I didn't know what I was being stopped for at the time. I wasn't abusive to the police officer. He was very kind and respectful. But I knew he didn't know when he walked up to the car. He's doing his job. The next guy that's speeding, if he doesn't do his job, and because it's too dangerous for him, because he's going to be criticized, could smash into my daughter's car and kill her. I'm glad for the job they're doing. We're the first ones when something goes wrong who call on the police.
Absolutely. And so Who was behind this push? Did it become obvious? I mean, we talked a little bit about some of the entities, but here we have Antifa, we have Marxists and communists that are gathering to cause this disruption in American society. Did you see the same elements in South Africa?
To a great extent, sort of the ANC, which is the ruling government party
Yes.
now, certainly behind a lot of that. Doing away with the law and order, getting the population in their pockets, and allowing the criminals to do their thing. You're getting those votes, and that keeps them in power. There's more and more people upset with it now, but think. A lot of Americans now, the youngsters, we all had to do military service. I had to go to the military and fight for my country for 2 years. It was good because you learned what freedom is about. You learned what it's all about. The youngsters here don't know what this is. I wish everybody could go and do boot camp in the military for 6 months and grow up and realize how good they've got it. But, the agenda is to take that away, and once it's gone, once your freedoms are gone, South Africa now, I wish I could just explain to Americans what a policeless society is like, or a useless police society is like.
This is an important point. And so some people are now saying, well, we don't want to abolish the police. We just want to defund them, or we want to kind of turn them into social workers or something. You used the word useless, Dave. So there is a police force in South Africa, but what happens when someone is the victim of a crime and they call in and say, 911 or whatever, hey, someone's in my house in a home invasion robbery right now, or I'm assaulted on the street, what happens?
Okay. The thing is, nothing. The police there now, your good policemen left the police force, which is what's happening here.
Sure.
Because they were criminalized. We had good, top, trained policemen. And doesn't mean some of them the bad things, but as I say, there are more bad accountants than bad policemen in ratios. Heal those. But they took out the good policemen. And now the police are untrained, useless. If you call if you get stopped at night by policemen, so many of your rapes are happening by police now. They've got this power. It's just terrible. You don't want to live in a society where you really can't trust the police. People try and say, you can't trust the police. Oh, believe me, you can trust the police. They are on your side. They might be fearful at night. 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, they stop you. They don't know what they're stopping. They're going to be on edge, but they're not going to abuse you. If you don't abuse them, this abuse that you've seen on Facebook and everywhere, the people are so rude, no respect for these cops. But you've seen a police force that the people left, and those police officers went into private security firms. So, South Africa now is a country we grew up, no fences, no security systems, no need for it. When I left there, my house had a 6-7 foot concrete wall around it.
Wow.
Electrified fencing on top of that wall. Beams, alarm system beams in my garden. Every window had steel bars on it. Every door had steel bars on it. My house inside had alarm systems. A steel door in the house which separated the house from the bedrooms. We slept at night with panic buttons, which I'd had to use. You lived in a jail, and there was no law and order. There was nothing. If I had to defend myself, the law goes. They took our guns away from us. In the past, as I said, we had to do military service. 95% of houses had a military-trained man in the house. 95% of houses would have a gun. Who's going to break into your house?
No one.
So they took the guns away. Now, probably 5% of houses will have some form to defend themselves. So people break into your house while you're there. If you call, your question was, what happens when you call the cops? Oh, well, they might arrive 2 days later.
2 days.
We don't rely on the police.
So how do you defend yourself if you're in your home and the government has now confiscated your guns? What are you supposed to do when someone comes in? Presumably they may be armed.
They are armed. That's the reality. They are armed. Yeah. Now, again, if 4 of them come in, they also tried this whole thing. It's unfair if I've got a gun and they've only got a knife. Well, I didn't call them to come into my house and break in.
Right.
Am I not allowed to have a better defense? I'm not asking for this confrontation, but you can. By the time the police get there, if you phone the equivalent of 911 there, if you get through to an operator, it goes. You phone 911 there, you get a voice message. You are number 12 in the queue. We will be with you in 20 minutes. Okay, that's what the policing has become. So you don't rely on the police. Now it's become, you've got ADT here. ADT for us was armed response.
So there are private entities that are armed
entities,
and they will come.
But they're not highly trained. So you've got, we had in our area, we had and you pay for it, you had a car parked there all the time. If we hit our panic button, it goes to ADT. They arrive and the cops will come later, whenever, But those guys are not highly trained. And again, their thing is to stand down if there's an active situation. So you're really at the mercy. And when you're looking at guys, wake up in this country. Don't think it's all rosy. You want to defund, you want to reform the police. No, we're here to reform criminals. Criminals are the problem, not the police. Who's complaining about the police? The criminals. Put it in. The cops aren't walking down the road and just abusing people for no reason. I'm not saying wrong things don't happen, but in the bulk of it, the guy's done something wrong. If I'm stopped for speeding, as a minor thing, I did something wrong. The police officer has every right to stop me, and I'll be respectful to him. I was trained. I respect him. He's doing his job, and I'm thankful he stops me because, as I said, or if I'm driving drunk, I want the police to stop that guy. And those guys that mouth off, arrest them. No, don't reform the police and defund the police and think we've got nobody to stop these guys.
Well, this is the problem because people are living in this la-la land premise that, hey, if we got rid of the police, that everything would be fine, that our communities would be safe and free from this harassment, and that we'll all get along. Now, we have an incident that occurred here that I have discussed on the air a number of times because I was documenting it during the time, but we had an Occupy takeover of Lee Park some years ago. I think it was back in 2011. And they put up an encampment there illegally, and they wouldn't leave, and the government started basically capitulating to them and coddling them, let them stay for 30 days. By the end of the 30 days, they were looking for rape whistles because this peaceful, wonderful society had turned on itself, and the powerful people were taking advantage of the powerless, and there was no one to stop them.
Yeah, that's what the criminal wants. That's what is going to happen. Cape Town was one of the safest countries in the world, cities in the world. Cape Town is now the rape capital of the world. Listen to this, Americans. They break into your house at night because they know you can't defend yourselves. They come in and they rape the woman in front of you. That's what they do because they've been given the power by the government to do that. You need police and law and order. It only suits the criminals. Don't think that they aren't criminals. The criminals don't want law and order. The drive is by the criminals, and it keeps people in power and agendas.
Dave Wannenburgh, just one more thing. I want to look at this from the perspective of, okay, we're in the midst of the same takeover that you lived through. If you could go back to where you were and try to do something to stop what happened, what would that be as it applies to today's America? In other words, what can we do?
I'll say something that's probably not popular, but when I look at the change, we should have gone to civil war. We should have fought it out and sorted it out, and we'd be a strong country today.
Yeah.
And we would have been fighting against the criminal element that wanted lawlessness. Criminal elements want lawlessness. That's what we would fight again. Standing up, empowering the police, thanking the police for what they're doing. Wake up and look at what's happening. Standing on the side of the road, wanting the police gone. You know, no law and order. Go and look, go and read up what's happening in a place like South Africa. Go and read up and open your eyes to what's happening around the world where the police service and the military have been criminalized and their power taken away. You know, we need to make the police force should be powerful. They should be given the mandate to get out there and do their job. And if someone is abusive to them, the police should be able to sort that out and arrest them.
Indeed.
We were arrested if we were abusive to a police officer. With his right, we would be arrested. You don't do that. That was respect for the law and order, respect for authority. The youngsters today haven't had that. They haven't been taught this authority. They think they're in la-la land, as you said.
Yeah, it's lost generationally, and it's very difficult to get back. You know, you mentioned you were taught by your dad. I was taught by my parents. And so once that goes away, And once it's lost for a generation or two, how do you get it back?
Right.
And I guess that's a topic for another day. Dave Wannenburgh, it's been a very instructive conversation. I sure hope we don't go down the road, although it appears that we're heading in that direction. And I really appreciate you joining us here today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Looking out for us. Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show. Charles W. Bill Carrico Sr., a retired Virginia State Police trooper and also a former state senator representing Virginia's 40th District. The topic today is something that would have seemed almost insane to be talking about just even a few months ago, but now is in the national conversation. It is defunding the police. Bill, thank you for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me this morning.
I want to talk first of all about your service as a state trooper here in Virginia and why you decided to serve there when you did.
Well, I grew up in Southwest Virginia. I grew up in a home in Smith County. My mother and father were very committed individuals to the community, and my dad worked very hard, and I just loved serving people, and I have a servant's heart, and had a lot of people ask me if I wanted to be a police officer when I was going to community college, and they actually talked me into joining the state police. And my first initial venture into it was I applied for the game commission and the state police at the same time, and the state police actually called me prior to the game commission. So I knew I wanted to serve in some capacity or another.
My perspective as an outsider, but looking at the Virginia State Police, is that it's a very professional organization. They have very high standards. You can tell just by the way the officers hold themselves in public. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit about your experience with the organization and if my perception is correct.
Well, I have said it time and time again, and will say it over and over. Virginia State Police is one of the finest organizations in the country, not just in Virginia. They hold you to a higher standard than most agencies. When I became a trooper, it was instilled in you that you were part of an elite group that was trained to do a job that would serve the public without fear, favor, or prejudiceness. And they expected you to uphold that image of that department when you went to work for them. And so they vet you very carefully. And when I was a trooper, I did background investigations. We go through thousands of people to just get a few hundred. And that's why you see so many shortfalls in the department today, because they have a standard that's higher than other agencies, and just anyone is not going to get hired by them. And then when you go through that basic training, it is you're taught how to handle and how to treat the public. You're taught to be as tough as nails, but as compassionate as Christ as you're going through that training. And I think that within itself, that within itself is why the Department of State Police is so well respected. And I know that every agency has a bad apple or two, but the Department of State Police and in Virginia, because we have a right to work law that prohibits unions from forming. You can have associations to advocate on behalf of the law enforcement officers, but a union cannot negotiate with the colonel of the state police anyone's job. That is the colonel's decision if you've done something and you're to be fired. And a lot of what we're seeing today in big cities like Minneapolis and places like that are based on the fact that they have union negotiators, and leaders are afraid to do any kind of action against an officer that actually does anything wrong.
We're talking with former state senator and former Virginia State Police Trooper Bill Carrico Sr. So I wanted to ask you about this push to defund. As someone who's been
Working in law enforcement, this must be a very distressing call for you to hear.
It is a distressing call, and I think probably if you ask most of the public, they feel that this is unimaginable to ask to defund police, because if you defund police, who's going to be coming to your aid whenever something happens in your home? The problem that I see is that we have some agencies that haven't had adequate training, and I can understand if you want to push for some more training mechanisms. As a trooper, we were never trained to do any kind of chokehold. You would have to be fighting for your life before you would ever be justified of doing something like that. And I think what people saw in the George Floyd incident was something that they thought police officers did all the time. That's not true. That is not exactly the training that every agency gets. As a matter of fact, probably if you look throughout the 1.5 million police officers, or ever how many's out there, there's very few departments that teach that. I believe that we ought to do a uniform type training, like let the state police take the lead and have it throughout the agencies. We have a Department of Criminal Justice System in the state. I believe that is where you ought to start. But to defund these officers is unimaginable. The problem that we have in Virginia and across a lot of the country is we don't fund them enough. We need to fund them instead of defund them. Their pay is low. The job that they do, they see things that the general public doesn't want to see, because you can never unsee those things. The murders and the accidents and the deaths that I've seen, I can name them to this day, and that's been more than 20-some years ago. And it's very hard whenever you're trying to do a job like that and you have your funding cut to your agency and you don't have the equipment, because most agencies, what they do is they cut the training first, they cut the equipment that you got to use next, and then they cut your pay, and then they start laying off people. So there's a layer of how they make those cuts. Funding law enforcement is how you get more professional law enforcement, not defunding.
So I wonder why that we can't see that, because in every other area of life, whether it's government or government schools or anything else, the constant complaint is, if they see a failure, is that they want more money. Why would this be any different?
I've never understood that. My whole career as a state police officer, I'll just give you a quick example. As a state police officer, I served for 15 and a half years. In that 15 and a half years, my pay was cut 7 times. My pay was frozen. And in that 7 years, when my accident occurred, I left the Department of State Police at my highest average compensation, somewhere around $32,000. I'd been on for almost 16 years. That pay didn't change a whole lot until after I became a delegate and began to advocate for law enforcement, their retirement and their pay. And it hasn't changed dramatically over those years. The state police starting pay is somewhere around $48,000. That has helped them, but it is not comparable to other states. And so once I was a delegate and spent 10 years in the House, and then advanced to running for the Senate and winning the Senate seat, served there for 8 years, served on House Appropriations, I began to have that discussion that, look, here's other states, here's what they're paying these individuals. We have got to do something to help them. And what they're doing is they're working these countless hours, and then they're working a second job because they got to make ends meet. And we expect them to be on top of their game and react to something in a split second. And, it's very disheartening that we can't see that if we want professional, up-to-date trained law enforcement officers that are going to interact with you every day of your life in some way or another, then we have got to pay them to do that job. I just wish every individual had the opportunity to do a simulated situation to a shoot, don't shoot situation and see how quickly that happens before they judge these law enforcement officers as to what's going on. It's remarkable how many people don't get killed because a law enforcement officer restrains themselves and would rather die themselves than to hurt somebody else.
You know, it's interesting you say that, Bill, because I went through such a simulation about a year and a half ago. A group came to town and brought that here for members of the local media, and it was absolutely remarkable how scary it is to be in the middle of that and how little time you have to make a good decision. And I got to tell you, I failed every time.
It is something that no one really can ever imagine until they do it, and it's scary to know that you're at the mercy of someone because your reaction time is a lot less than what their action that they're taking is. And I was amused at when I heard Joe Biden in a statement saying, police officers are shooting people who have a knife or a screwdriver. They need to just shoot them in the leg. And he's never saw how quickly, and that's what they call a 21-foot rule. If someone is 21 feet from you, they can kill you before you can draw a weapon and shoot them. And that's what the fear is about all this defunding the police and bringing in individuals like healthcare workers or mental health workers to de-escalate a situation. Now you're putting a mental health worker in the mix that the police officer is going to have to worry about to try to defend them. Because, when someone has a mental break and you go into a room and you see that this individual is distraught and there's things laying around, knives, screwdrivers, whatever that is, at any time that individual could grab that and you could be attacked. And now you're going to send in mental health workers that's not armed, and they're unable to defend themselves. So now you're going to put a police officer in the situation of having to assist and try to protect the mental health worker. It just doesn't make sense to me. I've been there. I've walked in their shoes. I know what it's like. I believe I could help in the sense that I've got the experience and I know what is common sense in this whole thing. And that's why I've been writing it and trying to give some common sense approach to this.
Finally, Bill Carrico, I want to ask you, we've talked a little bit about the officer recruitment and morale part of this, and certainly we have to be paying more to get a professional department. But I want to ask you, how do we address the public perception and the media distortion here regarding the public and the police?
Well, being a police officer, I've always said, is a calling. In other words, you didn't go into it for the money or the prestige. And as I said in the beginning, as we were speaking, I have a servant's heart. I just, love to help people. And those are the people that you have got to look for. And those are the people who today, they want to help and serve people, but they also have a heart to know that if they're being attacked by the media and by so many social groups that have gotten on social media and organized and do this for a political purpose, and that they're going to constantly be beat down, they will find another profession to go into. They're not going to go into that profession. And in the state police, there's some 250 people short right now. And a lot of the guys that I had worked with that stayed around and have worked throughout those years. This would be the 35th year for me. They're leaving, and the ones that have 25 years or more, they're out. So the Department of State Police alone could be some 500 members short by the end of this period. And you can't just hire someone to go back in and go to work. You have got to train them, and that takes a whole year to train someone and put them out there to work. The same holds true for each agency. And I'll just use Atlanta for an example. If they lose these men and women and they start walking away from that job, they're not coming back. And then it's going to take a process of a year to retrain those individuals and put them back out there to defend the public. The public is going to end up left at the mercy of the criminal if we don't stop this attack on law enforcement.
It is a dire situation, but I appreciate your speaking out and taking time to join us here today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Former Senator Bill Carrico, thank you so much for your service, and thank you for being with us today. Join us next time on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast and online at schillingshow.com.